I hid an Apache mom and her child. Now she wants me to father the next one and stay forever. I found her by accident, though later I would understand that nothing about that day was accidental at all. The ravine was narrow and cut deep into the red earth, a place where sound echoed strangely and the air stayed, cool even under a burning sun. I was tracking a wounded deer, focused on broken branches and dark drops on stone, when I heard a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness, a child's cry, soft and quickly silenced. My hand went to my rifle without thinking. Out here, anything human meant danger. She appeared slowly, stepping from behind a rock, as if the ground itself had given birth to her. Her clothes were torn and dusty, stained with dried blood. Long black hair fell in wild strands around her face, and her eyes, dark, sharp, unyielding, never left mine. She was Apache. I knew it instantly, not from her clothes, but from the way she stood, even exhausted, even cornered. One arm wrapped tightly around a small boy, pressed against her chest. The child's face was dirty, his eyes wide with fear, but he didn't cry again. He only stared at me, as if deciding whether I was death or shelter. Behind her fear was something heavier, determination. She was ready to fight, ready to run, ready to die if she had to. I realized then that she was being hunted. Soldiers had been moving through the area for days, pushing natives out, leaving nothing behind but ashes and bodies. Helping her would make me a target. Turning away would mean leaving a woman and a child to disappear into the rocks. For a long moment, none of us moved. The wind swept dust through the ravine, and the smell of blood and sweat hung in the air. Then the boy reached out toward me, his small fingers trembling. That single gesture broke whatever resolve I had left. I lowered my rifle and nodded once, slowly, signaling her to follow. The path to my cabin was hidden, known only to me. It wound through trees and narrow passes where tracks vanished on stone. She followed silently, never questioning, never falling behind, despite her exhaustion. When we reached the cabin, she finally allowed herself to sag against the doorframe, breath shaking. Inside, by the weak firelight, she sat with her back to the wall, still guarding her child, as if the world might burst in at any moment. That night the wind howled like wolves outside, but the cabin held. The boy fell asleep first, curled against her. Only then did she close her eyes, though even in sleep her body stayed tense. I watched them from across the room, uneasy, knowing that by hiding them I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. All I knew was that the moment I let them in, my life was no longer. The days after that first night settled into a quiet rhythm I hadn't known in years. Morning light filtered through the trees, thin and pale, and the cabin no longer felt empty when I woke. She was always up before me, moving softly, as if afraid the walls themselves might betray her. She cleaned the small cuts on her hands, washed the child's face with careful fingers, and watched the forest through the window like an animal that had learned survival the hard way. Trust did not come easily to her, and I didn't blame her. She spoke little English, but we learned each other through gestures and patience. Her name was Nayeli. When she said it, she pressed a hand to her chest, then pointed gently at her son. Taza! The boy smiled when his name was spoken, a shy, fragile smile that felt like a victory. Hunger had hollowed his face, but life still burned in him. I shared what little I had, dried meat, bread, warm water, and watched color slowly return to his skin. We lived carefully. I hunted at dawn and erased my tracks on the way back. She stayed hidden, teaching Taza to stay silent, to listen. Sometimes I caught her studying me while she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze serious, measuring. In her eyes, I saw questions she didn't yet have words for. Why would a stranger risk everything? What did I want in return? One evening, as I repaired a broken chair, she finally spoke more than a few words at a time. Her voice was low, steady, shaped by grief she carried without complaint. Her husband had been killed months earlier. Soldiers came at night, her people scattered like smoke in the wind. She ran with her child until running was all she knew. The ravine had been her last hiding place, not a plan, just desperation. "You hide us," she said, touching the wooden wall of the cabin. "This big thing." She searched for the word. then placed her hand over her heart again. Life, meaning, debt. I shook my head, trying to tell her she owed me nothing. That survival wasn't a bargain, but she didn't see it that way. In her world, protection created ties stronger than blood. To shelter someone was to bind your fate to theirs. As the days passed, Taza grew braver. He followed me outside, mimicking my steps, laughing when I pretended not to notice him. His laughter filled spaces in the cabin I hadn't realized were hollow. At night, when the fire burned low, Nayeli sang to him in a language I didn't understand, her voice soft but powerful, like a prayer meant to hold the world together. I began to understand then that they weren't just hiding in my cabin. They were slowly, quietly becoming part of my life. And whether I was ready or not, the shadows I had invited in were starting to feel like home. Winter arrived without warning, sealing the mountains in silence and ice. Snow buried the trails, erased footprints, and turned the cabin into an island cut off from the world. There was no leaving now, no pretending this was temporary. We were bound together by weather, by necessity, by the unspoken understanding that survival depended on each other. The fire burned constantly, and the space between us felt smaller, warmer, heavier with things left unsaid. Taza changed first. The fear in his eyes faded, replaced by curiosity and strength. He began to follow me not just in play, but in purpose, handing me tools, watching closely as I worked, learning by copying. One evening he tugged at my sleeve and spoke a word softly, unsure. It wasn't quite father, but it carried the same weight. The sound of it hit me harder than any winter storm. I said nothing, only nodded. But something inside me shifted. Settling into a place I hadn't known was empty. Nayeli noticed. She always noticed. Her gaze lingered on us, thoughtful, no longer guarded but searching. Late one night, when the wind battered the walls and Taza slept curled in blankets, she sat across from me by the fire. The flames painted her face in gold and shadow, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked calm. Not tired, not afraid, certain. In my people, she said slowly, choosing each word with care, a man who protects becomes family. She paused, watching my reaction. I felt my chest tighten, unsure where this was leading, unsure if I was ready to hear it. My son needs roots, she continued. Not hiding, not running. Her hand rested briefly over her stomach, then lowered. And I need a future that stays. The meaning was clear even before the words fully formed. She wasn't asking out of desperation or fear. This was not a plea. It was an offering shaped by her traditions, by loss, by hope carefully rebuilt. She was telling me that in her world, what I had already done carried responsibility and possibility. She was offering partnership, permanence, a life woven together rather than borrowed in secret. I tried to speak, but nothing came. I had lived alone by choice, convinced that solitude was freedom. I'd buried my past deep, believing it safer that way. Now faced with the chance to belong to something real, something fragile and alive, I felt fear sharper than any loneliness I'd known. Nayeli did not press me. She simply held my gaze, steady and patient, trusting me to choose. Outside the storm howled, but inside the cabin there was only the crackle of fire and the weight of a decision that would change all our lives. Spring came slowly, as if the land itself needed time to believe winter was truly over. Snow retreated from the shadows, water ran again through the stones, and the forest breathed with new life. With it, the tightness in my chest began to ease. The world beyond the cabin remained dangerous, but it no longer felt like a threat waiting at the door. Days passed without soldiers, without gunshots, without fear chasing us through the night. Silence for once meant safety. I never answered Nayeli with a single moment or a spoken promise. Instead, I answered her in the way I stayed. I repaired the roof when the ice loosened the beams. I cleared new ground for planting. I taught Taza how to fish in the stream and how to tell the difference between a harmless sound and one that meant danger. He learned quickly, his laughter ringing through the trees like something the land had been missing. Each time he ran back to show his mother what he'd learned. Pride lit her face, and I felt it too, deep and unexpected. Nayeli no longer watched the forest with constant fear. She sang more, worked with purpose. and moved through the cabin as if it truly belonged to her. Sometimes our hands brushed while preparing food, and neither of us pulled away. There was no rush, no need to name what was growing between us. It was built from trust, from shared survival, from quiet mornings and long evenings by the fire. One evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs and painted the sky in red and gold, Nayeli stood beside me outside the cabin. Taza played nearby, chasing insects in the grass, free in a way he had never been before. She took my hand, her grip warm and sure. "You chose," she said simply. I looked at the land around us, the cabin, the trees, the child laughing without fear, and understood the truth of it. I had chosen long ago, the moment I led them out of the ravine. I had just taken time to accept it. "Yes," I said, "I chose." I had hidden an Apache mother and her child from a world that wanted them gone. In return, they had given me something I never thought I deserved: a place, a purpose, and a family. The cabin was no longer a hiding place. It was a home, and for the first time in my life, staying forever did not feel like a loss of freedom. It felt like finding it,